With the announcement of Persona 4 Revival, the release of the next mainline Persona game feels somehow even further away than before. But if Persona 6 actually happens, what should it look like? I've thought about it for a while, so I bring you 6 things I really hope are in Persona 6. Number 1, higher difficulty. Now listen, I love the series, but my biggest complaint with this series overall is that it feels so easy. This is especially a thing with Persona 5 Royal. You could obliterate the challenge of that game by using social link benefits, baton passes, and showtimes. But with how many dimensions there are to Persona's gameplay and its systems, Persona 6 could be one of the most interesting gameplay experiences ever if it was super difficult. Having tough enemies ahead could make each decision a day have immense weight behind it. Just think about it. Should you hang out with a useful party member to give you an extra bonus in that dungeon? Maybe instead you hang out with that non-party member social link that gives you an insane battle ability. Or you could make some coffee for the other dungeon so you can take on the entire thing in one day, so you can have time to complete that social link that allows you to save time so that you can take your party members to the movies to get new skills, and in it, all of this becomes so much more meaningful if you need every advantage possible to take on the challenges ahead. I even came up with a difficulty mode. Let's call this EX mode. This would be selected from the beginning of the game and couldn't be changed later. This mode would not only affect damage given and taken, but would also change the movesets for the enemies heavily. Higher tier moves that you couldn't access until later, and much more diverse movesets. Another idea I have for EX mode is actually changing its name to be more thematic to whatever Persona 6 is about or whatever its identity is. To provide an example of what I'm talking about, let's go over what would be called in the other games: Identity Crisis, Perjury, Death Sentence, Serial Killer Documentary, Bloody Revolution mode. So with that covered, let's go over to the next item on the wish list. Hey, listen, each Navigator is a good character on their own, and they usually have some of the best social links in the entire franchise, but when it comes to combat, oh my goodness, they can get on my nerves. Talking literally every single turn, reminding you of every weakness of the enemy, every attack you dealt and received, and every ailment you dealt and received, and so much more. They're like the RPG equivalent to Navi. So to change this up, how about each Navigator has some sort of talking cooldown, where they only talk every other turn or every 3 turns, or they have like some sort of percentage to talk that turn, like 50% or less. Now you might say, Inaba, you're no authority to tell someone they're yapping too much. But my rebuttal is, with the issue of them being too in your face dealt with, I want to speak on some of my hopes for who the Navigator is as a character. So for 3 times in a row now, the Navigator has been a small, marketable plushie type character. How about the next Navigator is like one of the bro characters? Imagine if Kanji was the Navigator in Persona 4 instead of Rise. Some sort of camaraderie, bromance dynamic between the leader and Navigator would be insanely cool to see. I imagine this would be the quickest way to solve the issue of the Navigators sounding too high-pitched and squeaky. So with that covered, let's move on. I really hope you get to equip a large variety of costumes as you venture through whatever Persona 6's version of Tartarus or the TV world or the metaverse is. You know, at least costumes that aren't behind a giant paywall. Since Persona 3 Reload has you getting extra costumes for beating mini-bosses in the dungeons, what if they made these costumes themed around whatever dungeon they were collected in? For example, if you collect all the will seeds in Kamoshida's castle, you get some medieval armor, strutting around the metaverse dressed as a knight. With this simple idea, there's so much you could do, but I'll leave it there. Actually, speaking about Kamoshida's castle, let's get to my next general idea for Persona 6. Persona games usually hover around 70 to 100 hours. So if you want people to be hooked for that long, then a good opening arc is more than expected. Luckily, each Persona game delivers tenfold. Take Persona 5, which has the best opening act in the series and arguably in any game that I've played. It has great pacing as every plot point flows into each other. It has very high stakes as if you don't beat the first dungeon in the allotted time, the life as you know it is basically over. And now to address the elephant in the room, to kickstart the gameplay loop of taking down corrupt authority figures, your first villain that represents all that is wrong with the people in power is literally the worst thing that you could ever be. Hashtag release the Epstein list. The reason Persona 5 had such a good opening arc is because of how despicable the first villain was, giving you motivation to climb his palace and take him down, perfectly embodying the themes of righteously rebelling against corrupt authorities by presenting an unsettlingly real threat. So I pray to every deity of every religion that Persona 6 hits with something on the level of that magnitude. And because of what the last game delivered, I have high expectations for the opening act. But then again, it will be hard to write a follow-up to this. However, there is a possibility we get a villain like the Subway Slammer. So hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. No matter the formula for the next game, they can bring the gold. As for the gameplay side of this hypothetical opening arc of the game, I suggest switching things up from the past two games. They've been castles the last two times. I know this might sound off topic, but actually a lot of Persona 4 and 5 dungeons are like each other in a few ways. Take a castle dungeon, a green digital themed dungeon, an industrial dungeon, the 7th dungeon that has you confronting the main human antagonist. The message I'm getting across here with these comparisons is that I hope the first dungeon offers up a flavor we haven't tasted before from the Persona series, even if it is yet another castle to start us off with a familiar RPG location before we get into the crazy stuff. Hopefully they'll give us some new theming, like a castle overtaken by nature, or a gothic vampire castle, or like some demonic hell castle. So overall, your first dungeon needs to set a baseline and be interesting. So an alternate take on the castle formula would be much appreciated. So in conclusion, can't believe I say this, I miss you, Kamoshida. I'll never forget you, buddy. Alright. Now that we talked about what I hope for from the first part of the game, now we gotta talk about an element typically seen from the last part of the game. So major spoiler warning for all Persona games. Got that? Let's go. Let's begin this conversation in the only way I know how. Religion and politics. So each Persona game ends with you fighting a god of some sort. It's RPG tradition to end this way, so of course it's gonna be used in Persona. In 4 and 5, it just kinda comes out of nowhere after you defeat the main human antagonist of each game. This out of nowhere god character shows up, drops lore, has aura and hype moments, and then dies. Izanami and Yaldabaoth don't really feel built up to, despite being the final boss. What I want is a final boss god character that is referenced much earlier, with much more build up to the actual fight. Take Nyx, who feels like a natural conclusion to the game. Something had to be at the top of Tartarus, and considering that this is a video game, most likely a super strong climactic boss battle, and it made sense for Nyx to represent death in its truest, purest form, considering the themes. Right after the Hangman fight, you're told about a threat like this. It creates dread and fits so well with the themes of the story. To switch gears a little bit, going in, I thought Metaphor was going to end the same way 4 and 5 did. Like, what I thought was going to happen is that after we beat Luis Guillaburn, we would be suddenly introduced to the god of racism and politics, or whatever the fuck. No, they just ended with Luis. Speaking of that, that brings me to another way I suggest Persona can handle their final arcs. How about sticking with their human antagonist until the end? They kinda did this with Maruki, but he was added in the remake and wasn't the main human antagonist like how Shido was. So the big boss god can come before the human antagonist because of just how strong of a threat the dude is. Or maybe after you kill this deity, the human absorbs its power or something like that. So, with the request made, let's head to the last suggestion. One of the most, if not the most, recognizable parts of Persona is its killer soundtrack. If you ever heard this,
You never see it come back. You see
or even this,
disturbing the peace.
then it's from this absolutely killer soundtrack. Each game dedicates itself to a specific genre and to great effect. Persona 3 is rap, Persona 4 is J-pop, and Persona 5 is acid jazz. As for what the genre for Persona 6 should be, I feel it should be specifically alternative rock. If you want to know what separates it from normal rock, it's slight pop elements with the distortion of instruments. The best example, and the one I'll be using for most of this section, is OK Computer and Onward's Radiohead. Imagine music like that in a Persona game. Dog. If How to Disappear Completely played at the end of one of these games, I'm not emotionally ready for that though. That's the downside of this request. I'm not emotionally ready for that. Rock's my favorite genre overall, so I hope it gets a fantastic Persona OST dedicated to it. Specifically, using alternative rock would give an especially otherworldly vibe to the metaverse equivalent. So when you're in a battle, the OST could suddenly switch to some high-energy guitar music, so you could really use this subgenre for a lot of range when it comes to the tone of the soundtrack. The only negative side I could see is that the comment section of every single Radiohead song is gonna be, this sounds like Persona music. Kinda like what happened with jazz in Persona 5. But in the end, doesn't really matter what genre Atlas chooses, because the OST is going to be amazing regardless. Shoji Meguro is gonna be cooking with Jordan Ramsey, because at the end of the day, it's still a Persona OST. In conclusion, I could say that about really anything revolving around Persona 6, because no matter what they do, I know it's gonna be a 10 out of 10 just like the rest of them. So no matter what, the game is going to be golden. Perhaps royal? Maybe even worthy of a celebratory festival? It would be a nice reload to the franchise. Perhaps after 10 years of waiting, it'd be a good revival. It's most likely gonna be available on PC day one, so considering you combine that with a Steam Deck, it might be portable. Alright, I'll shut the fuck up. Especially if we're looking at the main series, even at its lowest points, it outpaces some series' high points. No doubt, Persona 6 is going to rock the world. Persona went from a series that could barely get translations in the West to a global phenomenon that stands alongside Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. The future of this series is bright, and I wish the absolute best for it. Through it all, no matter what happens, let's stay optimistic about the series. I hope you have a super day. Bye!